Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keeden Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
Spoiler warning!
Yeah, spoiler warning. We're going to be talking about a great show with in my personal opinion, horrible ending.
We'll have to see if you bring me around, but okay, so so Keeden has made it very clear to people, without spoiling anything, that he is not a fan of the ending of this show.
Yes, we are going to be talking about Umbrella Academy,
Yep.
A comic book written by Gerard Way that I have always been a huge fan of for its fun quirkiness. And so the last season just came out a few weeks ago, and they only gave it 6 episodes instead of like the normal length season they have. And I was not a fan of how it ended. I don't like when people's journeys are just pointless. I think that's what it is for me. I think that's what it is for me. Because
So what do you mean by pointless? Tell me more.
So the whole idea of the Umbrella Academy, because I don't think, have we ever talked about Umbrella Academy before on the podcast? I think
we just kept talking about it and then
I don't
never
think
got to it.
Yeah. But like I love the entire point where it's like, oh, we don't know where they came from. And I'm going to focus specifically on the show and not the comics for this. But it's like, oh, we don't know where they came from. It's just all of a sudden, and then Professor Hargreaves adopts them and then makes them a superhero team. And that is interesting. But what's more interesting is the flash forward where they're no longer a superhero team and all of them are doing their separate thing, but then get brought back together because of something that they need to focus on because of a reason. And that reason is, well, the first season's reason is their father died. Professor Hargreaves, the guy that adopted them. And so it brings them all back together. They've all been doing their own things. And more on that later, but to answer your question is, I hate when there is a journey that people go on and all of it ends with the answer is to undo ourselves from existence. Like, I remember when they did, what was the movie? And spoiler alert, but the movie came out like 20 years ago, so get over it. But The Butterfly Effect, there is an alternate ending of The Butterfly Effect where he goes back in time to when his mom was pregnant with him and just prevents himself from being born. It was something weird like that. And I was like, what? That's not an I hate when that's the answer. I think that's what's bugging me so much is obviously the answer is to just prevent ourselves from being born or wiping ourselves from existence. Because I'm like, well, that defeats the entire purpose of the show. It felt like giving up. And it felt like really, really lazy writing. I'll be honest.
So I did not have the same reaction to it. I'm finding all of this very, very fascinating, though. I can see where you're coming from, though. So, and honestly, depending on the mood that I was in watching it, I could see myself at certain mood states feeling the exact same way and reacting the same way you are. I it did not bother me that in the end it was we essentially to me I saw it as we are this ever perpetuated pattern within the universe. And in order for the universe to sustain itself without going into these very destructive modes and destroying universes, is to take away that part of the remove that part of the equation. I mean, it definitely sounds
Like
almost
a
like they're
break
all
the
coming
cycle
right
kind of thing?
MCU. Yeah, there's a little bit of break in the cycle.
Okay.
There's also, we talk about multiverses and all these different universes, and I think a part of me too. Granted, why is this theme coming up everywhere? I mean, MCU's doing everyone's doing the multiverses, but um, honestly, to me, sometimes like the multiverses, they becomes like bigger and bigger and more extreme, more extreme. All these different so convoluted. I kind of liked something that said, "Oh my God, there's just too much of all of these things, and how do we come back to one steady, streamlined universe?"
Hmm.
I will say though, I think you're right that the 6 episodes didn't didn't do them any favors.
Hmm.
Um, I loved I loved seeing certain parts of the storyline, but felt like there wasn't enough of them. And the ending came very it was like the ending took forever, but then the end solution happened very quickly. And then it focused on certain people's reactions to what they were I don't it shifted. It almost felt like a different show at the end. So I can definitely see where you're questioning the writing and just
Yeah.
how well it all comes together. And I think in some ways they wanted to keep the weirdness. But I definitely
See,
yeah.
and the thing is, I think the reason is like you said, they kind of shifted it because in the first few seasons, it was one of those things where it was always about like, how are we going to prevent the next apocalypse? How are we
Mhm.
going to prevent this one? How are we going to prevent this one? And that's the job of a hero. Every day
Yes.
you wake up
Mhm.
and you do it again.
Yep.
That's Superman. Superman does it
Yep.
every day.
Yep.
It's one of those things where it's like they came to Earth because they heard I'm here. Well, got to do it. He doesn't leave Earth.
But he does leave Earth when he finds out that he's destructive to it.
Right. Okay. I'll give you
So
that.
they find out that they are the cause of all of these patterns of the endings of the world. Now here's where things get tricky though, in that okay, we keep causing the end of universes, but also without them those universes don't exist. And so is it better to have one universe that continues onward, or is it better to allow for these other universes that eventually will have death and destruction? That I cannot answer. But I
Right.
I, I see it as like it is a heroic thing at times to stop fighting and sometimes to even give up or give in. In this situation, it's
Yeah.
not as easy as saying, "Hey, we save a bunch of lives,"
Right.
because technically you end a bunch of like it's not just them that cease to exist, right? It's
Hmm.
all of these different versions of the universe. And so
I guess.
I don't know if you're technically saving all of those
Right.
people or destroying them or that
Right.
I cannot.
Like that's the thing, and I guess it's weird because they set up this last season, and the whole theme of it seems to be, oh, we have to get this done without sacrificing Ben, without
Mm, yeah.
killing Ben. And it's like, okay, so that's your plan. And then all of a sudden, it's just like, actually, we can't get this done. Let's just call it quits. And it all happens in like 30 minutes. Like
Yeah.
all that a full attitude shift of like 3 or 4 seasons, just all of a sudden it's just like, and never mind. All of that,
Yeah, I'll
completely
give you
never
that.
mind.
I
And
will give you that, and especially with Victor, you see Save Ben, save Ben, save Ben. A
Hmm.
lot of other siblings get distracted, shall we say?
Yeah.
Uh,
And yes, oh my gosh, yes. I'll let you finish, but yeah, that's
yeah, but yeah, totally get that and agree that there is this whole piece of N especially with Professor Hargreaves and everything is really complicated there because it's their father, but not really their version of their father, but they're anyway. But no, you cannot continue treating us as if we're not human. We are humans. Our lives are of value, da 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 da, and then it shifts. Now, in some ways, you could say that their lives were of the utmost value because in choosing this path they're able to end this continuous destruction of worlds that's happening. Once again, was that the right choice or was there not a better option? I agree with you, it was a very rushed
well.
situation.
And another thing I didn't like too is Five is such a center point. He's one of my favorite
Mm,
characters in the whole show. And it seemed like everything shifted once he found out he couldn't have the relationship that he
uh,
wanted. That's what bothered me because it's like all of it, it was like, we got to save the world. We got to do this. We got to do that. And the moment it's like, oh, things between me and Lila aren't going to work out, we're the problem. And we all just need to
mm,
just end ourselves to prevent another like it felt like he was just it felt just like he was frustrated and tired,
yeah.
and instead of just fighting a good fight, like that's all. And like I don't know, and the thing is I understand that they didn't want to keep doing the thing that they did every season, but I thought that's what made it fun. It was the fact that
Yeah.
world's ended again. Now we got to go figure out how to stop it from happening again. And
So
like it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. You failed every time. You failed. But the point is, you fall so you can get back up again and continue fighting and continue trying to figure it out. And that's what
mm,
I wanted. I wanted them to be more than a a broken family that called it quits. Like
mm,
I wanted them to figure it out more, even
yeah,
if it was just them reconciling more as a family,
yeah.
and not big. But they wiped themselves from existence, still very much confused, and I just did not like that.
Well, yeah, there's also so in some ways they're trying to keep this weirdness by destroying the fact that they ever existed, which is
Yeah,
just a weird thing to sit with. And so I can see why they were so tempted to do that. But I actually the more I think about it, the more I agree with you that what I think would match this family more and also the weird quirkiness that is their existence is that reality still being true, that their very existence has created this ripple effect and therefore there are these worlds and they are going to constantly fail at saving these worlds with one difference. With them, instead of saying, okay, let's fold it into one timeline, instead saying that's ceasing to exist so many other worlds. And so this is having an acceptance. This is the purpose of us and what we do is to continuously fail at ending Armageddons, but doing the best we can and helping people where we can because look at how many worlds and things are going on because we exist, right? So like finding some way to actually make that work to keep going in some way, it could have actually been really interesting and more of a match for some of the funkiness too
right.
of the show and the characters.
But like the thing is, like it seemed like every season they were figuring it out a little bit more, and
Mm,
then when they brought the alternate universe Ben on in this season, everything would have been fine but he spiked their drink at sushi. It all would have been fine. And so their choice to end the universe was because of one person spiking their drinks. And that's it. Like that's what
So maybe I did get confused, I have to say, because yeah, was it just that one spike or was it the other Hargreaves? Was it Professor Hargreaves like bringing it to the planet from like wherever him and his wife came from? Because she suggested that he's the reason this all is happening. So that
and
was
she
another
caused it too.
confusing.
She's like, "Oh, and you
Yep.
she like
So it was confusing in that, okay, so there's all this perpetuating da 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 with them existing, but there are so many fives, right? So there's got to be so many of them too. So how come only one set has to go through the cleanse?
right." And
Was a little confusing.
that was confusing, and I don't like this idea that none of this was their fault, but they're just like, this is the answer. Like it was like this,
Mm,
you didn't cause this. Like you didn't even set up this reality. And it's just, yeah, I just wasn't a fan, especially because, like I said, I loved how all of the characters were kind of figuring it out. Like I
yeah.
loved that all the characters were kind of figuring it out, and then all of a sudden it was just like, and we're just gonna close the entire book, not in the chapter, close the book. And it was,
It
I
was
just,
honestly it I mean, I guess it was them dying in a sense, ceasing to exist or whatever, but in some ways it's some shows do a really good job of creating an experience a lot like death. So what you're describing actually reminds me of I was I watched I think it was the Mentalist,
mhm,
and there was a character that died, and then they just kept going. I mean, like, people were grieving along the way, but life continued, like, the show continued to happen in a certain way that
mhm,
I was like, "Oh, I see what you're doing here, and I don't like it." Where it just it made what that is so much more real, and it feels like that's what you're describing here is that is in like, if they had which, I mean, I guess they have killed off characters, but if they had just killed them all off, or you had the death of someone and they kept going or whatnot, it it's kind of that sort of thing that they're hitting on, this ceasing to exist, but they're doing it in a way that hangs different than if you just killed them off. And what's interesting about that is it hits maybe more on some of the existential pieces of death and the dread and discomfort we can have with it
yeah,
in going about it in this other way.
yeah. I will give you that. I will give you that. And I think
I don't
it
know if that's what they're
was,
going for the record. I just
and
found that interesting.
maybe they just wanted us to ask these questions about the bad writing. I don't like, I just, I hate when I feel like shows don't stick the landing, especially when I put
Mm,
so much effort loving it. Like,
yeah, yeah. I hear you. I
feel
think for
betrayed.
me, you know what I think part of it for me too is well, I told you part of it is what mood am I in when I'm watching it. So if I had been in a really bad, stressed out mood, feeling the weight of the world, um that could have sent me in an angry tailspin, I think, of like,
Mhm.
what's the point of anything? Oh, you know. And maybe hitting on some of those same chords that you're touching on. Um so I definitely think that's one of the things for me. Another piece is honestly, I a lot of times don't like how shows end. And I actually a lot of times I'll get to a point where I'm like that character did something that just doesn't feel in character to me, or how this wrapped up didn't really
Right.
hang well with me, or so I feel like for me I've created a bit of a callus, I guess, in terms of how things end, and just expecting to not necessarily love it as much as the rest of the show.
Yeah. And yeah. And like
It's hard to end a show, I think, based on just I don't know. A lot of it seems hard to get it right.
I'm I'm not gonna fully agree with that. They can get it right. They can get it right. I think that at the end, I think writers might suffer from overthinking a little bit,
That's fair.
and they screw up something that could be completely simple.
Okay. How would Keaton
Maybe.
have ended the show?
Well, I honestly, so if I could have picked an ending for this show, I think the way that they set up uh Victor's story about
Mm,
how he wasn't a part of the team and he
yeah.
wasn't a hero with the rest of them, and then having him maybe absorb all the marigold and make like a sacrifice play.
That's actually so I was thinking something like that would happen, that one person would
I
do the
was
sacrifice.
That's the way it seemed to be building towards, because every season it was like Victor was figuring it out a little bit
Mm,
more and figuring out a little bit more and accepting who they were, and it was one of those things where I was like, okay, this is what's going to happen, because the thing about Umbrella Academy is, outside of Victor, one of the issues with all of these characters is they tend to be very, very selfish.
oh, yeah.
They tend to be very, very selfish. And I was thinking, okay, if Victor makes this sacrifice, it's going to make them see, like, hey,
Mm,
there's more things than just me and what I want. Like, and it would have been interesting, like, hey, the entire time Victor was not part of the Umbrella Academy, guess what? Victor was the one real hero that all of y'all are gonna learn from at the
yeah.
end of all this. Like, that's how I would have rather it be ended. But instead, it seemed like they took all of their selfishness and the stuff that they didn't figure out, and they said the opposite of selfishness is erasing ourselves. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because I understand
Mm.
that, like, sacrifice could potentially be the opposite of selfishness, but it depends on how it's done, right? Like,
So this is a really good point, and I think it's really well in terms of the fact that Umbrella Academy is pretty much all about family dynamics,
yes,
particularly within a very unhealthy family in terms of how
yes,
they relate to one another. Um, they were raised in a very interesting way, and it makes sense that they struggle to relate to other people. Um, and, it is a good point that, especially, when it comes to relating to other people, we can try and give, and we can try and do things and try and work against some of the very things that we know that might not be the best parts of ourselves. But you do have to be careful, because your very attempts to help, or to sacrifice, to do something for the better, doesn't just because the intent is there doesn't necessarily mean that it it lines up with what actually would be useful.
right,
And so this is a family that really struggles to know and understand each other and relate to each other in ways where they'll try and help each other, and it's not helpful. And so, what you're describing, it sounds very similar to that. And, in some ways, they're working through those flaws, but yeah, they might not have thought this one through entirely. And it's a pretty big, yeah, I don't think there's an undo button for
right,
that, for ceasing to exist all of the other universes.
right,
So,
right. And I guess I just like, I like this idea of learning a little bit more in a hero's journey, or, like,
mm,
I guess
mm,
this thing, like, the whole idea of just life can suck, but we fight the good fight.
mm.
Like, that's the, I
Yep.
mean, honestly, it's it's one of the reasons I still read comics. It's it's there are dark low places in comics, absolutely. I mean, my favorite character is Batman, and he lives in Gotham, for crying out loud. But what does Batman do every day? Gets up, he keeps fighting the good fight, because in his head he's like, he still has hope. He still has hope. That's one thing he
Mm.
has. And I felt like these characters lost hope. It didn't feel heroic as much as giving up to me, especially because it came out of nowhere so fast. And I don't feel like they actually spent enough time exhausting every other option, because every time they were like, hey, Ben was this close to not getting shot, and they were this close to not drinking the
Mhm.
alcohol, and they were this close to doing all these things. And one small thing could have potentially saved their entire universe. And I'm like, I thought that was supposed to be the point, right? All we had to do
Mm.
was change this the whole time, and boom, we could be good. Because if this were the only option, then season 1, what universe was that? Because they were doing fine in season 1 for the most part. They were doing fine until they uh Victor, I guess that first season it was Vanya, but
Mhm.
got mistreated and then blew up the moon or whatever. But like, even then it was like, this is a family dynamic that causes these issues. This isn't like, a family dynamic should not be something that's like, well, the universe is going to end because of this,
Yeah.
because we need
I
therapy. Like, that's the
so
thing. Like,
so I don't agree that they lost hope. I think they refocused their hope. I think they refocused their hope on I think they were desperate to end the cycle because you had these same characters who kept cycling through different catastrophes over and over again. And so I think they shifted their hope from saving the universe they were in to stopping all of the chaos, which arguably is something that, once again, is hitting on that family dynamic, right? I definitely agree that there needed to be more time uh to process and maybe work through some of that, maybe seeing, hey, let's try some other things and them not working, to be able to better portray that.
yeah,
But I didn't see it as I didn't see it as a loss of hope. I saw it as a shift in what their goal was, which is if you're in, let's talk about, okay, so they're in an unhealthy family dynamic. You were talking about trying to change, and they're improving slowly, bit by bit, they're growing. And so this very much is a shift in the dynamic of how they perceive things, how they look at things, how they respond to things. Um, so I think in some ways it does play into some of those positive changes, but at the same time, it is, yeah. I'm with you. There could have been some overcomplication going on for the writers, or once again, just a little more time, or maybe reordering of things, or they, yeah, and they didn't have time to focus in on every character processing this information and coming to that end point. They only hit on one or two, and yeah, it almost needed its own season if they were
yeah,
going to play it out that way.
and yeah, and it was like season, yeah, season 1. It was like Victor was got upset, couldn't control his powers, and uh, destroyed the moon. Okay, and then another season, it's like what's his name? Harlan couldn't control his powers, and then called the, what was it called, the Kugel Blitz. And then there was another season, but it seemed like every single season it was one thing. It was just one thing. It wasn't them as an entire family. It was one thing, and then them as an entire family would try to stop it. But in reality, if we're talking about time travel here, there's an easy way to prevent all of it. Go back in time and you find a therapist. That's it right
The
there.
moral of Umbrella Academy. Get a
Moral,
family
whole moral.
therapist.
It's not, oh, well, I guess we just give up. No, you find a therapist. Like, that's what, maybe that's why I hate it so much. I'm like, no, all of this was caused by rough family dynamics.
And I think
That's not a universal thing. That's not a
Yeah.
universe scale problem.
But I think
They saw it as it.
yeah. I think what they were going for was seeing them go from fighting inevitability to acceptance. And there are some things about the picture that don't cleanly translate that. Like, for example, I was talking about which is better, because technically there's actually so much life outside of this main timeline that ceases to exist.
Right.
Is do we consider that a loss? Like, how are we supposed to process that piece?
Right.
Is it better to have existence and it ends up inevitably an apocalypse for all these different universes, but
Mm-hmm.
there are all these different, I mean, that's a big question. Versus having this one universe that is not going to have the but I mean, there seems to be this shift to acceptance that can be very hard, because acceptance can feel like you're saying what's happening is okay. And so clearly characters are not okay with ceasing to exist. Some of them, once again, they don't go into the inner workings of all the characters, but at least a few they suggest, like, okay, they're not okay with this. And they're accepting that, okay, this is the way to end this pattern of Armageddon and chaos.
Right.
Now, is that the right decision in the end? Uh,
Well,
I don't
and one other thing I was thinking about, all of these realities, there's like 43 different women that get pregnant. Hargreaves adopted 6 of them.
Yeah.
What about those other kids? Wasn't there just feel like they
That's a
should have
good
been brought
question,
into the mix?
actually.
That could have been
That's
brought
a
into the mix. I mean, maybe in this
yeah.
reality it was just those 6, but in the other realities, I mean, even the Sparrows, it was like, what if he adopted 6 other kids besides Ben? Like, what if he adopted some more kids and not them, right? And
Yeah.
so it's this.
I'm with you on this. Yeah, that's so there. Yeah, there's a lot confusing
Yeah,
that just doesn't get explained. That's a really great point. So
yeah,
in this universe, theoretically, there would need to be no other kids, or
right,
the cleanse wouldn't work.
right,
And then also, there's something weird about the cleanse that goes beyond the universe it's in, which is never explained. So
right.
why does the cleansing, or the merging with the cleanse monster or whatever, why does that reverberate out to all the other universes?
Yeah.
I guess they're talking about the merging of these opposing blah blah blahs. I don't know. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
with you that the explanation for these things
I
gets a
mean,
little fuzzy.
yeah, the wife and Hargreaves were seemingly from aliens from another planet. At least that's the way
hmm
they implied it. And so all of a sudden it's like, well, I guess Earth has to be destroyed because these 2 aliens just came here to live. Like, it's whatever. It feels contrived. It was, I mean,
Well, and then the
I
wife
know it's
was
supposed,
saying,
yeah.
oh, actually, the part that annoyed me, that was very
Oh, okay.
brief, but really annoyed me, was the ending with the wife. Because
Yes.
essentially what she told him is, you shouldn't have brought me back. It caused all this, so I had to end everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I actually
That
found that
bothered
really
me too.
annoying.
That really
It's
bothered
like
me too.
it's like you shouldn't have bought the puppy, so I'm going to take it outside and run over it with a car.
It's still selfish. It's still very selfish
Give the
individuals.
puppy to somebody else.
Right.
Like,
it's still very selfish individuals. Somebody was just minding their business a state away, studying for an exam. And it's like, sorry, bro, it is what it is. I
Yep.
didn't make the rules. He brought his wife back, so you gotta die. Like, I don't like what?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's
So
yeah.
I found it very annoying that
Hated
she was
that
saying,
too.
"Oh, yeah, the reasoning for her stirring up trouble all because it's like we have to undo what you did." It's like, so you're
Yeah.
destroying all of these people.
The hell is that? Yeah.
And also, if you're doing this to undo what he did, then it gets confusing because these worlds end up in apocalypses, right? So that's the problem with having all of the other worlds. But then she's actually causing the apocalypse to end the other apocalypses. So that gets a little weird.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that part definitely.
Yeah. It just felt like it just felt like they were trying to get it over with, because I mean it already was
Mm,
a shorter season, and this is also what bothered me. There was a rumor that they were releasing, like, at one point there was a rumor that they were releasing the first 6 episodes, and then later they were going to release the other 4. And so
uh,
when it ended, I was like, okay, that's a weird way to end it for 6, but
mm-hmm.
that'll just make the next 4 better. And then right after I finished it, I found out, oh no, that was it. That made it worse. That made it
You were like, they're
so
gonna fix it. They're
they're
gonna
gonna
fix
fix it.
it.
It's gonna be fine. They're gonna do what they
Oh, you
always do.
poor thing. You
And
got
then yeah,
strung
I
along.
did. I did. Yeah. And
That
so
makes sense. That would make it hit harder.
yeah, that did make it hit a little bit harder. So yeah, I absolutely I was not a fan of it. I because I just like I love the fact that this was a superhero family, and
Yeah.
they were not the Incredibles. They were not a happy-go-lucky family.
Oh
They
god.
had an emotionally abusive father,
Yep.
a robot
Probably physically
mom,
abusive. I can't remember if
probably as well. Like, yeah, I mean, the way he would just lock them up and stuff like that. And
yeah.
it was like,
Very
okay,
manipulative,
very manipulative. Like the
deceitful.
way Luther was just sent to the moon for years for
God,
no
yeah.
reason. And like it was just it was one of those things where I loved watching them process it.
Yeah.
And it seems like it seems like they just didn't get rid of it. I understand that, like, I mean, I've said it before, mental health is not something where it's like I'm cured, I have great mental health. Like, it's a constant fight, it's a constant battle. And
Mm.
I understand the fact that when all of this ended, they hadn't figured everything out, but I feel like they deserved better for what they went through.
So I think that's a big key, right? Is that the writers, it seems like pretty obviously, unless they're seeing it differently than we are, but they didn't want to leave you fully satisfied. They didn't
Yeah,
want you feeling like these characters got exactly what they deserved.
yeah,
Um, and I mean, once again, I do think there is this, I don't know how purposeful it was, but this attempt to pull in acceptance. How do we find a way to accept the fact that sometimes in life we can do our damnedest and we can try so hard and we can put in our best effort despite all the crap we were put through, whether it was a terrible Professor Hargreaves
mhm,
raising you or a sibling doing something or whatever it might be, all these different things. um you can fight and you can grow and you can do all these wonderful things, and life still happens. And how do you take all of
yeah,
that and find a way to be okay with it? Not okay in terms of like, oh, this is great, golly gee
yeah,
willikers, but how to find a way to to stop the cycle and say, I'm stepping out of the chaos, I'm stepping away from the violence, I'm not playing by these rules anymore, and I'm going to return to, as best I can, the calm of that mainstream universe. And did they do it perfectly? Absolutely not. Um, but a part of me wonders if that might be what they were going for, which is why it feels uncomfortable and why it doesn't feel satisfying.
Yeah.
And
And
it's not like the world ends badly, but it doesn't end great either. And it just kind of feels like life.
yeah. And the thing is, with life, a lot of times what ends up happening is if you're constantly getting into issues with this same person or with this same group of people, the hard decision that you have to make is I got to stay away from this person,
Oh, so hard.
right? I got to stay away from this person. That would have been, in my mind, a better
Mhm.
way to end it. Like, fine, we're a dysfunctional family and it's
Mm.
best for the universe for us to just stay away from each other.
So that would be a really interesting end
Yeah,
where if instead of what's perpetuating everything is their existence,
right,
it's instead their existence together. And the
right.
way that they are just pulling these negative things out of each other, it's somehow reverberating with their powers
Yes.
or whatever. That would be really interesting. And actually, I think that would it would be hitting a slightly different message, but
Hmm.
I think one that could maybe connect to people a little bit more smoothly. I like that
Yeah,
idea, and especially because yeah, it's
because
so
we
let me
all
tell
have people
you,
that we love and we have to keep our distance.
yeah, and you know what? Life is it's not what it should be. It is not the main universe, or I can't remember what they called it, but there's violence, there's chaos, there's abuse, there's manipulation, and there are people that ideally should be there for you and they're not.
Right.
Sometimes it's because they just can't. Other times they might be choosing. It
Mhm.
could be a combination. And you're really right. And there's such an intense struggle you can see, especially when it comes to family,
Right.
because innately we see in nature, we see all these things. There's something saying, hey, we should be tied to one another, connected, care for each other, even if there's not that biological connection, but being
Hmm.
raised together, it pulls for all these different things. And yet, sometimes we do have to separate ourselves, sometimes completely
Right.
from other people.
Right.
And we might love them dearly. And it might be the person who birthed us, it might be someone who raised us, it might be someone, a friend, a sibling. It might be so many things, but you're right. Like it, it could be such a strong message to
Hmm.
instead share, hey, how do we, how do we help the world become a better place? We actually have to find a way to
Right.
move our separate directions.
Yeah. And that's what I kind of, that's, I mean, I don't know. It seemed like there were so many different things they alluded to, but they
Mm,
didn't
mhm,
do
mhm. I agree with
any
that.
of that. And
Yeah.
so it's like if I was playing a board game and it's like, okay, this is how you win the game. This is how you win the game. At the very end, it's like, actually, this was Connect Four all along, and it's like, what? No, it wasn't. It clear. That's not. That's not even in the like. It's just I don't know.
Yeah.
It
Well,
just
I remember
yeah.
like my mom does freelance writing and stuff, and I remember telling me at one point because I always loved creative writing as a kid, and so I would talk about different story ideas and things, and um, she talked about how you have to be mindful that you don't betray the reader, that you don't like it's one thing to keep someone guessing or
Hmm.
to create a surprise or something they didn't expect, but it's you usually don't want to like pull the wool over their eyes or make them
Yeah.
feel like you cheated them or tricked them. You've got to do it in a certain way, and so I wonder if they were. I agree with you. There are all these potential things that could have been interesting. That if you sit and think about it, it's like, well, why didn't we go into that? Why didn't, or what about this? I wonder how much of that might have been trying to make it so we really don't know,
Yeah.
and we're just following along and seeing what happens,
Right. And
but also might be inadvertently pulling for you to feel like they they tricked you.
And that's interesting because now it just has me thinking like what writers are thinking sometimes, because I feel like some things that I read a lot of, like I read like Japanese manga,
Mm,
and I read the Harry Potter series and
mhm,
Rick Riordan, like Percy Jackson, which we cover, and all of that.
mhm.
Like I think about these things, and sometimes I look at main characters, and it seems like some writers just refuse to let the main character be happy. It's like, and they feel like
Mhm,
they feel, it's almost seems like they feel like they're not allowed to let them be happy. Like I can't let
mm,
this person win. I can't let this person
yeah.
be happy. And it makes me wonder where they're at, that they feel this
Good
way,
question. It's a good question. Yeah.
right? Like there was one manga, and this has just been a bad month for me as far as things ending
Oh
horribly. But
no.
yeah, there was another manga, and like the main character I absolutely love. He's great, and the whole story is supposed to be him becoming the world's greatest superhero. This is the story
Mm,
of how I became the world's greatest hero. And it ends with him losing his powers. And I'm like, what? Like, that's not, like, really? That's what you really? Like, why? Like, you didn't, and but throughout the manga, he's constantly in, like, somehow winning in these impossible situations, but they never just let him be happy. And I'm like, why can't you let him win? Like, I get that
mm.
life is rough, but like, give us something. Come on,
You
man.
know what this is making me think of is when we what was it called? Shadow of the Batgirl? Was that the name of the when we read that comic and we were like, it just felt
It was so
good.
happy. It was so happy about
Sometimes you just
Cassandra.
need
Yeah.
something, yeah, about Cassandra Cain. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just need something to end right. And God, I tell you, like I, I honestly think a big part of it too is just being a therapist. You hear all this stuff, and like, there's just so much freaking chaos in the world, and a person can try so hard, and then just all this stuff just keeps piling on top of them.
Yes.
Someone else doesn't have anything pile on top of them. They didn't do anything different, or they didn't, just life.
Yeah.
And so I think in some ways I tell you, it depends what mood I'm in. But sometimes I think it makes it so I watch Umbrella Academy and I'm like, yeah, chaos, doesn't it suck?
Yeah.
and, and then other times it'll spin me down that same hole that poor character is in.
Yeah.
Uh, because it's just, God, it would be so much easier if life was fair.
Yeah. And like and the thing is, I get it. I
You don't have to like it though.
right. Yes, exactly. And so yeah, I'm gonna say it to all of our listeners right
There you
now.
go.
Thank you for
Yeah.
listening to me complain tonight. I'm well aware it was very different, because I got up here completely annoyed.
I was excited. I hope it was as enjoyable for you all as me. Look, the thing is that I was so interested to talk to you about this because I knew that you were passionate about it. Sometimes you're passionate about loving something, sometimes you're passionate about hating something, or it annoys you or whatever. But I'll hand this to them. They got a reaction out of you. I don't know if it was the reaction they were going for. In fact, I bet you'd be even more annoyed if they were going for this.
Right. Well, I was
But
thinking, as we were talking about it, I'm starting to realize I don't know if we can ever I don't know if we can ever talk about Dark Knight Rises, because I don't know if there's anything else I hate more. Like I don't want to.
mm.
That's the peak. That'll be our last episode of Bat Therapy.
Ah,
The very last one. We're calling it. So
yeah.
we'll never, and so it'll never happen because we're never gonna quit. Boom.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keeden Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.